So in case you haven't noticed yet, an absolutely massive Pokemon leak has been making its way onto the internet over the past few days, and it's revealed a ton of beta uncut content from previous games that is just insanely interesting. And in this particular video, I wanted to talk about some really interesting evolution-related information that has been revealed from this leak. Stuff that reveals different evolutions for Pokemon that did actually make the final game, and just a ton of really interesting stuff like that. Like, for instance, the fact that Relicanth once had a pre-evolution. Relicanth is the kind of Pokemon that I never really would have guessed would have had a pre-evolution or an evolution. It just seems like a Pokemon that always would have been standalone, but according to this leak, it did have a pre-evolution at one point. In this video, I'm also going to be referring to information that has been compiled together from this leak by cut content website The Cutting Room Floor, so a big shout out goes to them. With that said though, this is what Relicanth's pre-evolution was going to look like, and for good measure, this is what Relicanth was going to look like at this point as well. And Relicanth at this point has definitely seen better days. He's looking pretty haggard. Jokes aside though, I think this actually could reveal to us what the original concept for Relicanth was as a Pokemon, because you can definitely tell that Relicanth is looking like exceptionally old in this design, whereas its pre-evolution, at least to me, looks pretty young and bright and youthful. So I'm wondering if Relicanth's original concept was simply just a concept of young and old, where its pre-evolution was meant to be like the embodiment of youth, where it was supposed to be the embodiment of just old and ancient and decrepit, basically. That is sort of the theme in its final design, but in terms of it just being a Pokemon that has been around for thousands and thousands of years, and not necessarily its age specifically. So maybe this concept was refined from just simply young and old into the general ancient Pokemon concept that we have with the final Relicanth. And that could be why the pre-evolution was eventually cut. It's still absolutely wild, though, to think that Relicanth ever had a pre-evolution at any point at all. That is just something that I personally never would have guessed. Another evolution that is absolutely wild is a cut Spinda evolution. Spinda is another one of those Pokemon that you just never would have imagined having an evolution due to its unique gimmick, but according to this leak and according to the information that has been documented by the Cutting Room Floor, this is what Spinda's evolution was going to look like. It is known as Poutsu, and despite the disbelief of Spinda having an evolution, you can actually see this Pokemon being an evolution for Spinda because it's clearly a panda, and it also has the same general color scheme, just with a little more pink in its design versus the red and orange of Spinda. There is unfortunately not a lot of other information at this time to report on regarding this Pokemon or its evolution from Spinda, but simply that information all on its own is absolutely insane. As you can see, we are currently focusing on Gen 3 Pokemon because that is where all of the evolution information from this leak, as it currently stands, is coming from, and there are also Pokemon from Gen 3 that did evolve in the final games that also had scrapped evolutions as well, like, for example, Shroomish. In this leak, we have gotten to see beta designs for both Shroomish and Breloom, but the interesting thing about this is that apparently these Pokemon were going to have a third stage with their evolutionary line, and it was going to be a middle stage Pokemon that originally sat between these two that eventually and evidently was cut. It unfortunately does not seem like we have a sprite or an evolution for this middle evolution at this time, but even still, it's really interesting and fascinating to imagine what could have possibly fit between Shroomish and Breloom, even at this beta stage where their designs were a little bit different. And speaking of different, this next one is a little bit different because it actually is what helps to keep the lights on around here. Manscaped is the sponsor of today's video, and their new Chairman Pro razor is probably the single most high quality product that I've ever seen from them, and I genuinely love their stuff. It is a razor for your face, but like, the quality on everything is just so next level. First off, it just has a great feel in your hand, like you're holding something that's actually really well designed and well made, but then what really makes the difference are all its great features. As a facial razor, it comes with two different blade heads, one with a more standard blade and the other with a foil blade. That can be swapped in and out, but the thing is, they're magnetic, so changing them in and out is unbelievably easy. It also comes equipped with skin-safe technology to prevent nicks and cuts. It is waterproof. It has an LED light that you can toggle on and off to help make sure you don't leave any hairs untrimmed. It's rechargeable. And the thing that really sold me on this razor is that it has a battery percentage display that appears whenever you turn on the razor, letting you see exactly how much power you got left, so you never have to guess whether or not your battery is going to die in the middle of shaving, which is genuinely unheard of for a razor, and it's honestly next level. The best part is you can also get this for 20% off with free shipping when you use the link in the description and code HoopsVGM at checkout, which also helps out the channel too. And honestly, I feel like this would make a great gift for the holidays coming up because it's genuinely just so nice. So give it a look with the link below, and a big thanks to Manscaped for supporting the channel. There were also other Hoenn 2-stage evolution lines that originally were going to be 3 stages as well, like, for example, Makuhita and Hariyama. I talked about this one in a previous video, but Makuhita and Hariyama were originally going to have a pre-evolution that was essentially its baby form, which is really interesting considering that Makuhita doesn't really seem like it needs a pre-evolution, but still really cool nevertheless. Another one that I haven't talked about though that is really interesting is that Manectric was originally going to have another evolution and make it and Electrike part of a 3-stage line. This evolution was apparently known as Ryo or Ryu and follows the theme of Manectric and Electrike in being an electric-type dog Pokemon. However, despite having those similarities, it also looks pretty different to its pre-evolutions as well, which I personally find interesting, and it's also interesting that even in this beta leak, Manectric and Electrike look pretty much identical to their final designs, while this Pokemon looks pretty different from them comparatively. It also looks pretty goofy too, for what it's worth, and I think what possibly could be going on here is that originally these Pokemon were going to be part of a 3-stage line. However, at this particular point in development, I feel like this final evolution was probably already in the process of being phased out, and that is why Manectric and Electrike look a little more refined and close to their final designs, while this Pokemon not only looks different, but very much looks like a beta Pokemon. Like, it does not look like a polished, finished product at all. So I feel like he's probably kind of just a leftover at this point and is like really close to being cut for good, but he's still around just because they haven't quite given him the axe yet. But still, nevertheless, the fact that Manectric had another evolution at any point at all is absolutely mind-blowing. Now, another kind of cut evolution is when a Pokemon that does appear in the final game and is also part of an evolutionary line originally had a different pre-evolution or evolution to what it does in the final game. I also talked about this one in a previous video with the Flygon family, who initially evolved from a different first stage Pokemon instead of Trapinch, who was later swapped out for this Pokemon later on. And another Pokemon that falls into that same kind of category is Claydol, because originally Claydol did not evolve from Baltoy according to this leak. It instead evolved from this Pokemon. This Pokemon's name is Tata, and it seems like, according to the cutting room floor, that this Pokemon is based somewhat around a top. This does actually check out as far as evolving into Claydol goes, because Baltoy, Claydol's actual pre-evolution, does also resemble a top itself. However, this particular Pokemon is obviously completely different design-wise to Baltoy, to the point where it evidently is a completely separate Pokemon. Interestingly, Claydol was also pretty much in its final design at this point as well, so it's not like it looked drastically different, it just had a few different colors than it does in the final product, but still it is really interesting to see that this Pokemon originally had a completely different pre-evolution. Now here's one that is absolutely crazy interesting, because what if I told you that Grovyle originally evolved from a completely different Pokemon? And then what if I told you that that Pokemon eventually came out later on in Generation 5? Because it is actually the case that a Pokemon that eventually would become Scraggy and Scrafty originally was the pre-evolution for a Pokemon that later became Grovyle in Generation 3, which is just ridiculously insane. So to explain all of this, this is a Pokemon that was cut and revealed in this Generation 3 Pokemon Beta leak, and it clearly resembles Scraggy and Scrafty. Not in terms of its design specifically, because it obviously looks pretty different, but it clearly has the baggy skin pants, which is a key and very unique feature of Scraggy and Scrafty in Pokemon Black and White. So one way or another, this Pokemon most likely was later reworked into those Pokemon a couple generations later. Then, if we look at Beta Grovyle, it clearly looks pretty similar with the color scheme to that Beta Scrafty. And the reason why this is a Beta Grovyle is actually pretty interesting, because at this point it wasn't Grovyle at all. It was a completely different Pokemon that later was repurposed in terms of its body style and general design into Grovyle, so it was just completely reworked and revamped, and its general shape was all that was kept in the final product. It was also a rock flying type as well, which is really interesting, and as I mentioned in a previous video where I also talked about this guy, it was known as the Archaeopteryx Pokemon. So it's a completely different Pokemon to what Grovyle would actually become in the final release version of Pokemon Ruby and Sapphire, but nevertheless, this is where Grovyle originated, and it originally evolved from a Pokemon that would later become Scraggy, and this isn't just based on their design similarities either. It evidently is the case that it was actually legitimately going to be an evolution for this Beta Scrafty, and this seems like something that is actually confirmed within the beta information itself, which again is just insane to think about, and it really makes you wonder what other Pokemon out there could have initially been related to one another via evolution or other means that in the final games don't have any connection to each other whatsoever, because Scraggy and Grovyle are two Pokemon that you never would have expected to have a connection to one another. If you can believe it though, that one might not even be the craziest one of the video, because it has actually been confirmed by this leak that Tropius was originally going to be a part of an evolutionary line, and it had not one, but two pre-evolutions. Everyone has always wanted Tropius to get something in this department, and even though it seems like it wouldn't actually evolve into another Pokemon because it's pretty big on its own, people have always wanted to see it get a pre-evolution, and originally, apparently, it was going to have two of them, because according to this leak, this Pokemon was a pre-evolution of Tropius, but not only that, this was just the first stage of this line, and there was going to be a middle evolution in between the two of these Pokemon that bridged the gap between the two of them, and unlike other Pokemon that we've already covered, like Shroomish and Breloom, you can definitely see with these two how that would actually happen. This Pokemon was also apparently a grass water type, which is interesting because even though Tropius also has a beta design of its own at this stage where it does look a bit different, it apparently is still grass flying type. So if these were actually the final types of these Pokemon that were planned, there was going to be a sort of change in type for its secondary type going from water to flying. However, even though that seems kind of weird, I can also see how that might have been accomplished and what they might have been going for. Because apparently, this first stage Pokemon was going to be the Sprinkler Pokemon that was documented in a separate leak a little while back. Back then, we only had the Dex entry, but it described a Pokemon that was reminiscent of a Sprinkler, and evidently, this is that Pokemon. So with this line, they could have originally been going for a plant motif where this Pokemon is a sprinkler and it grows itself into a fruit tree, basically. That is Tropius, which is also evident with the whole banana situation. That could potentially be what they were going for. I could see that sort of thing happening, but regardless of whatever the case is, it's just really cool to know that Tropius actually did have a pre-evolution, and apparently it had 2 of them. We don't have the sprite or the design once again for the middle evolution, it seems, but that's just still cool even to know. This next one, though, is probably the single most interesting case that I'm going to talk about in this video, and I don't even think its information is 100% confirmed. I believe it is just speculation and theoretical at this point, but even still, this would have been insane if it had actually happened. So one of the Pokemon that was revealed in this leak was this guy. Yes, this was a Pokemon, and it evidently is how it was supposed to look, even if it is just in a beta form. Its name was Ibaroto, and it was a normal type, and it doesn't evolve into anything else, at least according to the beta information that we have. However, it seems like it was planned to have a very special method of evolution. The first clue is due to the fact that its name seems to be a combination of evolution and lotto, or lottery. That on its own is probably going to be enough to pique your interest, but there's more, because this is another one of those Pokemon that had its Dex entry leaked back in the day, like that Tropius Sprinkler pre-evolution, and now we can connect the Pokemon to the Dex entry. It was known as the Lottery Pokemon, so there's that emphasis on lottery once again, and its Dex entries are as follows. It is confirmed to change its shape at the time of evolution, but what causes it is unknown. It is a hot topic among Pokemon researchers. How it manipulates its body is mostly unconfirmed. It has no visible mouth and ears, but it is only known to react to sound and light. So essentially we have a Pokemon that is tied to evolution as its main concept, seems to be mysterious even to Pokemon researchers, and also has a theme of lottery. It also has a very simple, almost blob-like appearance as well, almost reminiscent of Ditto to where you could see it actually become anything, and it seems like becoming anything is actually the theme of this Pokemon and what it would have evolved into. And so, this next part, which I don't think is actually confirmed information, I think it is just a theory based on the information we have, and correct me if I'm wrong, once again, this is all fluid and developing as we speak, but I just wanted to put that out there, that I don't think this is confirmed at this point, but with that said, it seems to potentially be the case that this Pokemon could have possibly been planned to evolve into any random Pokemon, or at least a large number of various Pokemon, similar to Eevee, but just purely any random Pokemon. And that is theoretically where the lottery part of this Pokemon would come from, because its evolution is a lottery system. You're just gonna get a random evolution when this Pokemon evolves, and it could be anything. Again, that is just a theoretical idea based on this Pokemon's information. I don't think that is 100% confirmed at this point, but it does seem to be the case that some variant of that idea could have very well been the case for this Pokemon, which is mind-blowing to say the least. Even if it was a limited number of Pokemon, or maybe it had its own set of Pokemon that it could evolve into and it was completely random, even that alone is a fantastic concept for a Pokemon, and it would have been incredible to see it actually come to life. I can definitely see why they would have cut it, because the concept is just so crazy to the point that you could definitely see it being too crazy for an actual game, but that doesn't change the fact that it's amazing at the same time, and it would have been awesome to have this guy, or even just a Pokemon with this same concept, actually appear in an official game. And I can only hope that we get something similar to that eventually, because that would just be such an incredible and cool and fun thing to see. You guys are going to have to let me know which of these evolutions you would have liked to have seen in the final game though, and if you enjoyed the video, be sure to leave it a like and subscribe for more as well, because I'm going to continue to cover this leak as we continue to get more information. And with that said, I will also be back soon with another new video, so be sure to stay tuned for that. And until the next one, as always, thanks so much for watching this one. I really appreciate it, and I will smell you guys later.